They hired him for prestige, but prestige doesn't debug pipelines. By the time HR noticed the model decay, the access logs were sealed and AutoML had stopped responding. Some errors aren't bugs, they're warnings in disguise. The first thing you learn when working with machine learning at scale isn't how to build models, it's how to protect them. From noise, from time, from people, especially from people. On Monday, HR sent the Slack announcement at 8:43 a.m. sharp, sandwiched between a mass ping about open enrollment and a donut emoji from Darren in DevOps. Please welcome Thomas. He joins us as Principal ML Engineer, Stanford, MIT, ex-Googler, total beast, no photo, just a link to his LinkedIn and a CC to the CEO. I stared at the message for a long second, not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. We'd seen this before. Big name, big smile, big salary, and a team forced to pretend that basic onboarding wasn't now a 30-hour favor unpaid. 2 engineers had already quit after the last strategic hire. The rest of us had become quiet. By 9:12, Thomas was outside my office, tall, clean-shaven, AirPods still in. He didn't knock. "You must be Ava," he said. "I'm told you're the one to shadow." He smiled like a VC pitch deck. I returned the expression with one I reserve for untested variables. By 9:40, I'd walked him through our AutoML pipeline. Feature stores, model registry, online-offline splits. He nodded like someone understanding a TED Talk. "So, this part here," he pointed vaguely at the monitoring tab, "you guys log metrics to a separate DB." There it was. The first hairline fracture in the confidence. "No," I said slowly. "Metrics go to BigQuery. Logs are forked via pub r sub to S3 and Splunk. Alerts route through Ops Genie, all tied to archive lock." Archive what? I blinked. Archive lock had been our internal failsafe since the data poison scare of 2023. Every model checkpoint, every signature, every rollback path, frozen on trigger. Non-reversible. Non-negotiable. By 10:05, I'd updated my personal protocol. No access to prod for Thomas. Audit mode only, but the head of engineering had other plans. "He's Ivy League," Claire said in the Tuesday strategy sync, without irony. "And his comp's tied to ownership of Model Group B. Legal already moved the access." I looked at her. She didn't flinch, justified by pedigree, implemented by policy. That night, I triggered archive lock on all production models under my name. It took 2.4 seconds and burned the audit hash into 6 locations across 3 clouds. I watched the confirmation blink on my screen like a lifeboat light drifting away. He wouldn't be able to touch anything I'd built. Not unless he understood why the lock existed. Not unless he understood what happened before. Wednesday, 12:07 p.m. AutoML threw error 502 during a daily health check. The pipeline didn't crash. It simply stopped responding. By 12:09, our dashboard telemetry flattened. No metrics, no loss curves, only silence. At 12:12, Thomas messaged, "Hey, quick cue. The retrain job you had scheduled, where's the YAML for that? I thought I deployed it." There it was again. He thought he deployed it, except no one had given him deployment rights, not even AutoML. I opened the last commit hash from 9:58 a.m. He had cloned a draft notebook and rerun it without staged approval. AutoML read the commit but couldn't validate the signature. Result? The system panicked, refused to retrain on unsigned code. I pinged DevSec. Darren was already on it. He tried to override the trigger path, he said, but archive lock bounced him. Looked like he copied a template from a Coursera repo. The silence in the channel said everything, but not as much as what came next. "He can't read this code," said the head of engineering from a thread I wasn't supposed to see. And that's when it began. The unraveling. He thought the models would forgive him. He didn't realize they were built to remember. Thursday, 8:21 a.m. The models were still frozen. AutoML refused to retrain. The triggers were grayed out. And Slack was buzzing like a nest someone had poked too hard. Half the engineers assumed it was a cloud outage. The other half knew better. By 8:35, HR had pinged me directly. "Hi, Ava. Quick check-in. Did you perhaps enable archive lock manually? Legal is reviewing deployment privileges this week." Smiley face. No punctuation after manually. The kind of message written by someone who had no idea what archive lock even did. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I reopened the audit trail and watched Thomas's fingerprints ripple through the metadata like oil in water. He hadn't just cloned a notebook. He'd tried to rewire the pre-processing layer. Badly. Worse, he did it using a deprecated branch we'd sunsetted 8 months ago after the health bias report. A branch with known vulnerabilities. A branch that, if exposed, could force us into a full transparency audit. I blinked once, slowly. This wasn't an error. This was risk. At 9:11, I walked into the glass box labeled War Room. The head of engineering was already there, scrolling through something on her tablet, jaw tight. Thomas sat opposite her with a laptop open and the unmistakable posture of someone trying very hard to look busy. When I entered, he didn't look up. "Let's get this over with," I said, pulling up a chair and my own machine. Claire gestured toward me. "Ava, can you walk us through what happened?" Thomas opened his mouth, but I cut him off. The retrained pipeline was manually triggered using an unsigned config. The commit was unverified. The checkpoint failed integrity. Pause. I let the silence breathe, then continued. He used the old BMI-adjusted scoring layer, the one we deprecated, which violates our internal bias policy and triggers archive lock. Thomas looked up now. "Wait, bias policy? That's not in the onboarding docs." Claire raised an eyebrow. "It's in the compliance packet." He shrugged. "Didn't read it. I figured it was standard stuff." That sentence hung in the air like static before a lightning strike. By 10:03, compliance had been looped in. So had legal. Suddenly, everyone wanted a call. Zoom invites began populating my calendar like mold spores. I rejected the first two, accepted the third. It was labeled Cross-Functional Review Model Recovery Path. At 10:45, I clicked Join, and there he was, Thomas again, seated beside HR, legal, and one of the VPs. His camera was on. His bookshelf behind him was color-coded by genre. I'm not making that up. He began with charm. "I think what we're seeing here is a classic case of over-engineering. The lock system is beautiful, no doubt, but brittle. It assumes perfect human behavior, which, let's face it, isn't realistic." He smiled like a man pitching a rebrand, not apologizing for violating core architecture. Someone from legal asked, "Did you read the policy around retrain authorization?" He chuckled. I scanned it. Honestly, a lot of the technical stuff went over my head. That's why we hire specialists, right? That's when I knew. He wasn't just unqualified. He was dangerous. I dropped a folder into the Zoom chat. Redacted logs, time-stamped screenshots. A note. "Please see page 5, unauthorized mutation of feature layer resulting in a frozen production pipeline." The head of engineering unmuted. "I need to say something." The room quieted. "I authorized his access based on credentials. I didn't expect this." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. HR jumped in. "We're exploring all internal learnings here. It's not about blame, it's about growth." Growth. As if a system collapsing under a poorly copied notebook was a growth opportunity. I muted my mic before I could laugh. Instead, I typed, "We'll need to rebuild the pipeline from a safe snapshot. That will take 72 hours. Until then, archive lock stays." Claire didn't object. Neither did legal. Thomas, however, tried one last thing. "I mean, we could just roll back the whole thing to my initial commit and patch forward." I looked him straight in the eye. That's not how integrity works. By 1:12 p.m., the rollback protocol began. AutoML remained locked. Thomas's access was downgraded to read only, but the ripples weren't done. At 2:20, I got a ping from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. Cameron, ex-staff ML, the guy who built Archive Lock before the layoffs. "Hey, just saw something weird in the logs. Why is Stanford boy pulling inference stats from prod?" I stared at the message, then checked the logs again. He wasn't pulling metrics. He was exporting them. He didn't know Archive Lock tracked exfil attempts in real time, but now legal did. If this unraveling feels too real, you're not alone. Hit subscribe to follow the quiet fight for integrity in tech. Friday, 7:06 a.m. The first ping came from the security team, not the usual Slack. This one was from Watchtower, our internal SIEM system. Subject line, alert, unscheduled data egress, model group B inference metrics. At first, I assumed it was just another ghost trigger, the kind that flickers when Cloudflare jitters. But then I saw the source IP, Thomas's machine. Even worse, the request was disguised as a health check. By 7:15, I was in the office, no coffee, no music, no patience. I opened the internal evidence dashboard. 3 export attempts, all blocked, all logged. The file names were clean, corporate, like someone naming evidence for legal deniability. Model B eval, fullset.csv bias, curve, internal.xlx. Perf snapshot, qwar war v2 PDF. I hovered over the third. The download had failed at 14%. That was enough for pattern analysis, enough for someone to reconstruct our calibration layer. He wasn't just incompetent, he was harvesting. 8:02 a.m., I slid into the head of engineering's office without knocking. Claire was mid-sip of her oat milk latte. She froze. Archive lock picked up 3 egress attempts, I said, masked as health checks. Thomas's IP, yesterday. She put the cup down slowly. How bad? I dropped the log hash on her desk. This isn't just a mistake, it's theft. He tried to move proprietary metrics out of our secured container. Claire's eyes darted to the window where the skyline did nothing to comfort her. Does legal know? They will. But I'm not going through HR, not this time. 9:23 a.m., Zoom call. Participants. Me, legal, head of SecOps, Claire. I presented the forensics cleanly. Timestamps, IP logs, hash validation, geo-metadata, no speculation, just facts. When I got to the packet inspection dump, legal leaned forward. Do we have confirmation that no PII was involved? Yes, I said, but the bias analysis layer was in the file he tried to pull. That changed everything. In our world, leaking a bias curve, even unintentionally, could trigger a compliance firestorm, especially if it reached regulators. Or worse, Twitter. Legal went quiet. Then, we need to speak with HR. Claire finally spoke. He's been here less than a week. The SecOps guy snorted. Hell of a week. 12:40 p.m., HR called a culture sync. Yes, really, a culture sync. Thomas was there, video on, polo shirt pressed, as if nothing had happened. I joined with my camera off. HR opened gently. We wanted to touch base on recent access challenges. Thomas, there were some concerns raised. Yeah, he interrupted. I noticed a lot of lockouts. It's been slowing me down. Honestly, I feel a little sidelined. I typed one word in the private legal chat. Sidelined? He continued, undeterred. I mean, we're all here to build, right? But I keep hitting walls. Over-engineered systems, excessive controls. Honestly, it feels like there's no trust. No trust. From the man exporting files in disguise. HR smiled tightly. We hear you. We're balancing safety and empowerment. I spoke up. Thomas, did you initiate any health check exports yesterday afternoon? A pause. His face didn't twitch, but his hand did. A subtle click on his trackpad. No, not that I remember. Lie. I dropped the access log hash into the chat. Subnet 10.1945.3. Export attempt blocked. Archive lock flagged. Claire unmuted. You said you didn't remember. This says otherwise. He blinked. I thought it was a standard ping. Maybe I clicked something by accident. Legal cut in. That's enough. We'll follow up formally. The call ended 2 minutes later. 2:15 p.m., I triggered internal flag. High-risk actor. It wasn't just about protecting the models now, it was about protecting the system from people who wear competence like cologne. By 4 high, Thomas's credentials were suspended pending review. He didn't know yet, but archive lock had already shut every door, silently, completely, and I wasn't done. Monday, 6:58 a.m. Thomas still had no idea he'd been locked out. His Slack was functional, but anything beyond emoji reactions returned a connection error. His Get access was revoked quietly on Sunday. AutoML showed him cached dashboards, static, lifeless, a simulation of power. He was inside the office by 8:03, latte in hand, talking loudly about refactoring the model ingestion layer. I watched from my desk. He spoke like someone who still believed the room respected him, as if the silence was a signal of awe, not insulation. 9:17 a.m. Claire called an architecture sync. Her tone was neutral. Her eyes weren't. I joined remotely, camera off. Thomas clicked in 5 minutes late. He still didn't know. I want to walk through our upcoming Q2 model refresh, Claire said. Ava, can you outline the new gating? I shared my screen. The document was titled Model Group B Trust and Integrity Controls. Revised first page, Zero Trust Architecture, Role-Based Checkpoints, Real-Time Anomaly Detection, Archive, Lock, Tripwire Expansion. Thomas blinked. Wait, are these new? I kept my voice even. They were drafted last quarter, finalized this week. He forced a chuckle. No wonder I couldn't deploy anything. You basically Fort Knox the whole stack. Claire didn't smile. That was the idea. 10:11 a.m., he tried to SSH into a sandbox container. The system responded with AUTH fail policy. 9.3 restricted user policy. 9.3 was new. I wrote it Saturday. It covered behavioral anomalies in high-privilege environments. It also made clear that attempting to circumvent system barriers would result in escalation to internal affairs. He clicked again. Access log caught it. Click. Deny flag. Security was already watching. 12:32 p.m. lunch. I sat across from Darren, DevSec's quietest savant. He passed me a phone with a screenshot. Thomas emailing himself through a shadow Gmail account from a borrowed iPad using guest Wi-Fi. File attached. Model eval notes final.docx. He renamed it, Darren said, but hash is identical to the flagged export attempt from last week. I exhaled. The arrogance wasn't surprising. The stupidity was. What do you want to do? Darren asked. I thought for a moment. Then opened my laptop and typed subpoena A2 draft request intellectual property. Exfiltration, Model Group B to Internal Affairs. It was time. 3:07 p.m., Thomas was in a meeting with HR when Internal Affairs arrived. 2 men in business casual gray, they didn't speak. They handed him a sealed envelope, walked him out. No drama, no words. Just a silent erasure of presence. His monitor went dark. His Slack status turned to unavailable. His desk emptied by 4 Eloy. I watched it all from the mezzanine, unnoticed. When the elevator doors closed behind him, I let myself exhale. But the code didn't rest. AutoML was still frozen, not from his tampering, from what he left behind. Tuesday, 8:10 a.m., Thomas was gone. Officially, on administrative leave pending investigation. Unofficially, shadow banned from the entire infrastructure. The office was quieter without him, a kind of nervous peace, but the damage wasn't over, because the models still weren't healing. AutoML remained locked in a recovery loop. It wasn't refusing retrain. It couldn't validate trust. 3 of the integrity checks now failed silently, cascading into a recursive wait state. It was like the models knew something was off. At 9:02, I sat with Darren and Arjun, the only 2 people I trusted with infra-level access. Arjun spoke first. We traced the trigger path. Darren slid over a report. Chain of custody, Model Group B, retrain flag path 187. It showed 5 edits, 4 of them traceable. The 5th, anonymous, no timestamp, no username. Impossible, I said. Darren shook his head. It's not a ghost commit. It's a time desync. He ran a container clock offset, wrote to the flag file while masking the audit ID. That wasn't just a policy violation. It was a breach. At 10:45, we initiated full forensic lockdown. Every model in Group B was cloned into a quarantine environment. AutoML was paused, manually. That's how bad it was. We couldn't trust the models, not yet. Claire joined us in the recovery room. Her face was unreadable. I signed off on his onboarding, she said, staring at the frozen dashboards. Because he had logos. Because HR said he'd increase our investor confidence. She exhaled. But prestige doesn't predict pattern stability. No one argued. 11:33 a.m., I cracked open the oldest production snapshot from 3 months ago, before Thomas. It took 32 minutes to compare checksum deltas, and I saw it. Subtle, but critical. He had introduced a silent override in the weight decay schedule. It looked harmless, even helpful, but it introduced skew over time. And worse, it bypassed our stability test, buried under helper functions, obfuscated behind variable names like temp, loss, adjust. He rewired the very heart of our retrain cadence, not to improve, to impress, and that almost cost us everything. 2:09 p.m., Cameron, the original architect of Archive Lock, dialed into our recovery call. He looked older than I remembered, but sharper too. "Check your rehydration logs," he said. We did. Silence. Then Arjun whispered, "Wait, there's a fork." A latent subprocess. A shadow branch Thomas must have tried to train offline. No monitoring, no alerts, no lineage. It was trained on unapproved data, exported. "That's your breach vector," Cameron said, "and your legal liability." We stared at the screen. Claire finally spoke. "We erase it." Cameron shook his head. "You don't erase poison. You contain it. You document everything. That's the only way to rebuild trust." 5:37 p.m., I opened the internal policy dashboard, scrolled to policy 10.4, data intervention reporting, then created a new entry. Unauthorized model fork detected. Origin, user.Robinson. Status, irrecoverable action, isolate plus disclose. We weren't just engineers now. We were historians, writing the full account of a trust collapse, line by line, log by log. Only then could we begin to rebuild. Wednesday, 6:26 a.m. I arrived before the badge system was online. Security waved me in manually. The building still carried that pre-dawn hush, fluorescent hum, stale coffee in the air, echoes too loud in open space. By 6:42, I was back in front of the dashboard. AutoML was breathing again. Barely. One of the shallow retrain sequences had passed integrity checks overnight, a promising signal. But the deeper models remained in stasis. They were waiting for something more than code, for confirmation that the world outside was safe again. 9:10 a.m., Claire slid a single printed sheet onto my desk. The header read, "Internal Affairs Review Summary, Case IA 2724B, Subject T. Robinson Determination, Breach Confirmed Action, Termination with Cause, NDA Reinforced, Civil Action Under Review." Below that, a short note in Claire's handwriting. "We learned. Let's not forget." I folded the page and tucked it into my notebook, next to the original Archive Lock schema, right where it belonged. 10:03 a.m. HR sent a campus-wide email. "Team, we remain committed to transparency and trust. After a routine review, we are restructuring Model Group B to improve cross-functional safety and reinforce our zero-tolerance policy for unauthorized access." They called it routine, as if the last 10 days had been a calendar sync. But no one believed that. And maybe that was good, because belief without scrutiny is how breaches begin. 12:17 p.m., a new engineer, Nira, was onboarded to Model Group B. Sharp, quiet, observant. She asked the right questions, and more importantly, she listened. I walked her through the Archive Lock triggers. "This isn't just about rollback," I told her. "It's about responsibility. We don't let models forget. Not anymore." She nodded, and then asked what no one had dared ask since the breach. "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" It landed like a soft punch. I answered honestly. I thought locking the system was enough, but sometimes silence looks like consent. 3:44 p.m. Cameron sent a final ping before boarding his flight. "Tell them Archive Lock worked, but tell them why it had to." I replied, "I will. This time, we'll teach it forward." The system was stabilizing. Trust wasn't a setting, it was a process, harder than code, easier to lose. I reactivated one last monitoring layer, social traceback, behavioral anomaly watch. Because the breach hadn't just come from ignorance, it came from belief in immunity, and belief, left unexamined, becomes danger. 6:02 p.m., as the sun dropped behind the mirrored skyline, AutoML began to train, not because it was told, because it finally could. Thursday, 7:03 a.m. The retrain curve wasn't just stable, it was elegant. Loss fell in clean arcs. Bias metrics glided within tolerance. The system was learning again. But not everything we needed to learn was in the model, because underneath the math, something else had been exposed. Our blind spot. At 8:21, Claire called an all hands, the kind that made Slack threads go quiet. She opened with data, always with data. In the last quarter, we've onboarded 3 senior engineers based on résumé prestige. 2 triggered escalations. 1 caused a system-wide freeze. We need a new hiring protocol. No euphemisms, no soft landings, just hard truths wrapped in neutral lighting and corporate chairs. The head of HR shifted in her seat, not defensively, cautiously, like someone realizing their checklists weren't shields. I took the mic next. I didn't plan to speak, but I had to. We trusted titles more than testing. We listened to degrees instead of behavior, and the models suffered for it. I let the silence hold. Then I added, archive lock didn't save us. People did. That was the shift. 11:04 a.m. We began rewriting internal policy, not just for onboarding, but for code review, access control, and ethical compliance. The working doc was titled, Trust is Not a Role. Policy 9.3 got expanded. So did Policy 10.4, new section, Behavioral Profiling via Access Logs, Early Detection of Pattern Anomalies. It would have caught Thomas by day 2, but no system replaces culture. 1:47 p.m., Neera pinged me a question. Why do you call it archive lock? Sounds like a vault. I paused, then answered. It was Cameron's name. He believed models remember everything, even what we wish they'd forget. So he designed a lock not to hide mistakes, but to preserve them. Neera replied, so it's not security, it's memory. Exactly. 4:18 p.m., the dev team added a new trigger to archive lock. When activated, it doesn't just freeze weights, it captures context. Last 10 Slack messages, recent commit summaries, active user IPs, system sentiment analysis. It doesn't just protect the model, it tells a story, because someday someone will ask, how did this happen? And now we'll have the answer. Friday, 6:59 a.m., a new build passed QA overnight. AutoML trained, scored, deployed. No anomalies, no regressions, just smooth, verified performance. But I didn't feel relief. I felt caution, because system recovery is never just technical. It's cultural, and culture doesn't reboot on commit. At 9:02 a.m., I was invited to a closed-door review. Claire, legal, the CTO, and, surprisingly, HR agenda line. Postmortem, model group B, narrative and liability. The word narrative struck me, because for the first time, they weren't just asking for logs or fixes, they were asking for a story. We sat in silence for the first 30 seconds. Then Claire began. We've cleaned the logs. Legal is confident we're covered, but what we can't scrub is reputation. So Ava, what should we say? I looked at them, all of them, and I said, we tell the truth. HR shifted. What truth exactly? That we designed a system so elegant it could be disabled by a single ignorant actor, that we gave access to someone who passed interviews but failed ethics, that our models were smarter than we were because they knew when not to trust. The CTO exhaled. You're saying we admit failure? I shook my head. I'm saying we admit accountability. 11:36 a.m., Slack pinged with a system-wide message draft. I helped write it. This week, our engineering team faced and contained a critical trust breach. The failure wasn't in our models. It was in how we assign trust. We're rebuilding both. No blame, no names, but no hiding either. 2:50 p.m., the engineering wiki was updated. The new page, what we learn when we lock the archive. First section, archive lock was not created to punish, it was created to pause, to give us time to ask, who's touching our models and why? It listed the breach timeline, policy updates, behavioral flags, and at the end, a link to an anonymized playback of the failing retrain job, the one Thomas triggered. A subtle reminder, not of failure, of vigilance. 4:44 p.m., as the sun knifed across the glass walls of the 21st floor, I stood at the observation deck and watched the city shift. I thought about everything we'd built, everything we almost lost, and what it meant to restore trust, not with words, but architecture. Somewhere behind me, a junior engineer debugged a pipeline I'd written 2 years ago. I didn't turn around, because I trusted her, and because Archive Lock was watching, quietly, Monday, 10:02 a.m. The system was steady now. The models moved through their cycles like breath. Inhale, train, exhale, serve, pause, monitor, repeat. No spikes, no unverified commits. Silence, the good kind. But under that surface, something new was forming. A shift, not in code, in us. At 11:13 a.m., we held the first post-incident architecture council, a pilot session proposed by Cameron before he left. We called it PIAC, which HR hated and engineering loved. The premise was simple. One engineer walks the team through how something went wrong. No slides, no blame, just systems, stories, and silence. Today, I was the speaker. Room was full. More full than I expected. I stood in front of the whiteboard and wrote 2 words, false confidence, then circled it. I walked them through the timeline, not the tech, but the behavior. The résumé inflation, the charismatic deflection, the quiet rationalizations. It's just a sandbox. The team's silence when things started to smell off. Then I said the part I hadn't admitted yet. I saw it coming. And I said nothing, because I didn't want to be that person, the blocker, the difficult one. But models don't care about feelings. They care about structure, and structure failed. The room was quiet, not heavy, not angry, just aware. 1:49 p.m., I had a coffee with Neera. She was debugging a time sync issue in the sandbox, and I offered to help. But instead, she asked, "Do you think archive lock made us paranoid?" I considered the question. "No," I said. "It made us honest. We just weren't ready to look." She nodded. I was scared when I saw the logs, but now I'm more scared of not seeing them. Exactly. 3:20 p.m. A system alert pinged, detection, overlapping permission flags, user Neera S. I flinched, then opened the trace. It was a false positive. Her system tools had duplicated a red permission during a test suite run. Harmless. But the alert was real. Archive lock had noticed, and that was the point. No one was exempt. Not anymore. 5:01 p.m., Claire posted a final update in the engineering channel. Model Group B is officially out of recovery mode, thanks to everyone who didn't flinch. We don't need perfect people. We need honest systems. It wasn't poetic, but it was right. I clicked and closed my laptop. The breach hadn't ended when Thomas was walked out. It ended when we chose to build from the scar, not erase it. Thursday, 6:59 a.m. The badge system scanned me in with a soft beep. Same sound as always, but everything behind that sound had changed. I walked the same corridor, saw the same glass-walled meeting rooms, passed the same neon-accented move fast, think deep mural. But now, we believe the second part more. At 8 hours sharp, AutoML retrained on live data. Clean, bias-free, monitored. A full loop. The same loop Thomas had tried to short-circuit. We didn't celebrate. No cake, no post in Dauber wins, because it wasn't a celebration. It was a restoration. And restorations are quiet. 10:12 a.m., I visited the old training cluster, the one Thomas never touched. It still held the earliest models. Messy, underfit, beautiful. One of them, model dev 055 early risk, was the one we'd used to flag potential bias in insurance scoring, the reason archive lock was built in the first place. I reran it on current data out of curiosity. It underperformed. Of course it did, but it never lied. It just did what it was told, unlike some people. 12:03 p.m., HR sent a new onboarding checklist to all managers. Item number 3. Validate candidates' technical reasoning, not just credentials. Confirm comprehension of policies, especially archive lock, access, log auth, policy 9.3, chain of custody protocols, auto retrain constraints. No more rubber stamp prestige hires. No more he's Ivy League justifications, because prestige doesn't validate integrity hashes. And it sure as hell doesn't debug error 502. 2:44 p.m., I stood with Darren on the roof deck. "Do you think it's over?" he asked. I shook my head. "No breach ever really ends. You just stop finding new damage." He nodded, then added, "I've started thinking of archive lock like a smoke alarm. No one likes when it goes off, but they hate what happens if it doesn't." That stuck with me. 5 p.m., One final task. I reopened the archive lock schema, the original one from Cameron. I added a line. If user flags false trust, trigger policy 11.1, then I created policy 11.1. When confidence outweighs competence, archive lock will remember what people forget. No fanfare, just a small truth baked into code. 6:31 p.m. As the office lights dimmed and the dashboards cooled into night mode, I took one last look at the production console. Every system green, every trigger quiet, every model aligned. But I didn't log off yet. I just watched. Because sometimes the safest system is the one that's watching back.